Oops. Hi, I'm Simon Richter, University of Pennsylvania. I focus on the cultural aspects of climate adaptation in the Netherlands, Germany, Indonesia, and the US. Let me begin. It won't surprise anyone if I say that the Dutch don't like talking about retreat. The Dutch believe they live in the safest delta in the world. Projections of sea level rise don't faze them. The delta works and their iconic storm surge barriers protect 26% of the country at or below sea level. The majority of the population, millions of people, and the preponderance of their assets are already below sea level. There's been no flood-related loss of life since 1953. Everything is under control. That being the case, how do you tell the Dutch that it makes sense to plan for retreat? Let's complicate things even more. There are 7 taboos that protect the Dutch psyche from the specter of inundation. Don't question our peerless water management prowess at home or abroad. Don't cause panic. Don't carry on about the severity of climate change. Don't endanger our Moody's AAA rating. Don't notice our poor greenhouse gas mitigation record. Don't get in the way of spatial planning. This one is under pressure, as is the last. Don't mention retreat. First, some context. In 2008, the Second Delta Commission was tasked with preparing the nation for the effects of climate change. Taking the 2007 IPCC report as reference, the Commission recommended that the country prepare for sea level rise of between 65 centimeters and 1.3 meters by 2100 and 2 to 4 meters by 2200. Retreat was not on the table. Our delta, the coast and its hinterland, is home to a vast wealth of economic, ecological, and social values. It's inconceivable that the Netherlands would want to sacrifice this wealth. By and large, the guidelines and the sentiment of the Second Delta Commission still guide Dutch water defense policy. The precautionary numbers the Delta Commission proposed depend on not including the uncertain contributions of Antarctica. The 2014 Delta scenarios used for planning at the national level trim the numbers even further. Worst case scenarios assume a maximum of 40 centimeters in 2050 and a maximum of 1 meter in 2100. But things started to shift in 2017 when the renowned Water Research Institute Deltaris quietly published the results of a policy hackathon under the title, "What if Sea Level Rises More Rapidly?" Concerned that the Netherlands was seriously underestimating the risk, a multidisciplinary crew of almost 30 experts calculated the limits of the water defense systems and proposed adaptations for scenarios ranging up to 20 meters. The analytic part of the hackathon was elaborated and reissued more officially in September 2018, you see it on the right, under the title, "Possible Consequences of Accelerated Sea Level Rise for the Delta Program." The new report claimed that the Delta works would be adequate until 2050 and that it was necessary to begin planning for higher sea levels immediately. An infographic showed the limits, costs, and, interestingly, the nagging virtual proximity of Antarctica. Up until this point, the discussion about accelerated sea level rise flew under the public radar. That changed in early 2019 when a national weekly published a splashy article with the title, "Sea Level Rise is a Bigger Problem Than We Think, and the Netherlands Doesn't Have a Plan B." Shortly thereafter, a landscape architect, Erik Jan Pleister of Lola Landscape, countered on social media with what he called Plan B. It showed an inundated Netherlands with the dunes as barrier islands and a new coastline in the east forming a lagoon with raised and floating cities as well as floating agriculture. Pleister addressed retreat head-on. The inhabitants of the lower parts of the country will have to move themselves and all facilities, infrastructures, and employment opportunities to the east. Along this eastern coast, the economic heart of the country will be reconstructed. But statements such as these still fall on deaf ears. The same cannot be said of Deltares' next move. It released a publication called Strategies for Adapting to Higher and Faster Sea Level Rise, which spelled out adaptation pathways the hackathon had hinted at. Crucial for public debate were 4 images that represent distinct ways to approach sea level rise. The drawings are in a cartoon style designed to disarm the viewer. Protect Closed shows the Netherlands as a fortress and foregrounds massive pumps required to drain polders and rivers. Protect Open emphasizes the spatial consequences of keeping rivers open to the sea. The bustling image of Advance involves offshore land reclamation, a new airport, and the creation of a freshwater lake along the length of the coast. All 3 of these mean doubling down on armoring the coast, regardless of the costs in terms of carbon footprint and environmental impact. Only the 4th, moving with the flow, technically accommodate, makes room for the sea and implies retreat. The 4th is also the only image that gestures subtly towards the borders with Belgium and Germany, Duitsland, that would come into play because of migration. Deltares' efforts paid off. In 2019, the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water and the Delta Commissioner established the Sea Level Rise Knowledge Program. Their remit extends to exploring adaptation pathways and timelines for the future, but emphasizes the elimination of sea level rise uncertainty and the viability of existing measures first. The 4 pathways in their pictures were widely distributed. Marjolein Haasnoot, Deltares' climate adaptation expert, appeared on television, radio, online, and at town halls. What became increasingly apparent was that the long-term choice had resolved into 2 diametrically opposed strategies. The 2 versions of Protect were simply not enough. The only serious alternatives were Advance, which resonates well, or Accommodate plus Retreat, which resonates poorly. Although the Dutch won't decide to construct a coastal seawall anytime soon, every decision to build new housing, infrastructure, and other buildings at levels lower than 2 meters above sea level is a wager that they eventually will. This matters. The Dutch want to build 1 million housing units in the next 10 years. The Delta Commissioner and the Union of District Water Authorities publicly and urgently advise caution. Should the Dutch persist in building below sea level, it will be because they are proceeding with what I call a too deep to fail policy. So how do we motivate actions that lay the groundwork for a massive measured relocation to the east? I suggest that we start by adding 4 pictures that represent possible outcomes based on the choices the Netherlands makes. Let's call them 1, the big gamble. Dutch priorities remain the same. Dike reinforcement continues, as does investment in the lower Netherlands. Perhaps the Paris Climate Agreement is a success. Perhaps sea level rise is limited to 1 meter by 2100. It's a big gamble, but who knows? Maybe the Dutch will be lucky. 2, hostile takeover. Sea level rise accelerates, a massive storm strikes, and the Dutch water system fails. The lower Netherlands are flooded. The economy is devastated. Millions seek shelter in the east. The Dutch are dependent on international aid. 3, capital flight. Moody's decreases the Dutch credit rating. Investors flee to higher ground. Wealthy inhabitants follow, while low-income residents remain trapped. 4, a second Peace of Münster, abandoning the war against water and tapping into the historical negotiations that enabled Dutch independence and a framework for peace in Europe after the 30 Years' War, the nation embarks on a visionary transboundary project with Germany and Belgium. I'm excited by the prospect of using an ethnographically informed participatory design process to imagine in compelling detail a Dutch-German transboundary region that entices and absorbs massive population shifts from coastal regions of the lower Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany against the temporal backdrop of accelerated sea level rise. It will involve a transboundary region that purposefully synergizes the economic potential on both sides of the border. The transportation system and renewable energy infrastructure that will make this possible, an integrated environmental land use plan that makes decisions about afforestation, agriculture, and biodiversity according to ecological criteria, a beautiful variety of transboundary social housing developments based on sharing economies, equity, energy autonomy, and community agriculture, the pioneering legal frameworks that will be needed, the intentional cultivation of the kind of welcoming culture that will be the hallmark of thriving communities in the Anthropocene, and the kinds of education and community agency that can make it happen. There are indications that the viability of retreat is making further inroads. Deltaar has subtly revealed the existence of a banner for retreat called Verplaatsen among the adaptation pathways. Notice the format consistency. In a recent editorial, Marjolein Haasnoot reshuffled the Deltaarist deck, collapsing the two forms of protect into one and explicitly introducing the term retreat. In an interview in a prominent national newspaper, she said, "We don't know when, but retreat will become an attractive option. It's still on the table, even in the Netherlands." Thank you.